Four user games for tonight. So I figured I would start off with the Scotch game, get started on here, and take a look. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to do. I wanted to look at these Scotch games and go e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6, d4. So this is the Scotch. There's a number of responses. Basically, I would say that by far the most common thing for black to do is play e takes d4. These d6 lines are pretty weak. If we're actually going to do like an analysis of this, basically, the Scotch is not considered to be, I guess, particularly good in its main line by the engine. But you have e5 facing off against d6, and d6 here is enough to give white a solid advantage after pawn takes, and then neither queen takes, king takes, or on king takes. Hey, good evening, Aphelion. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for joining the stream. How are you? So basically, the Scotch basically has to be accepted, is my point. So pawn takes d4, and then here basically, there's a number of options. So knight takes d4 is most popular is white. There's also bishop to c4. In the bishop to c4 case, knight to f6 is playable, bishop to c5 is playable. I actually play bishop to c5 here. This has served me pretty well after playing it many times. C3, knight f6, e5, and d5 here. This is a mainline Scotch game, just so I get the name right. Guaco piano game. This is basically an attack with white against this pawn on knight on f6, and black with an attack on the bishop on c4. Those tend to be the most common ways that this is played. So that's off of the bishop to c4 line. On the knight takes d4 line, black plays bishop to c5. White plays bishop to e3, black plays queen to f6, white plays c3, and basically there's a lot of kind of contention around. So more used to seeing this from black's perspective, but basically there's a lot of kind of opportunities for white to play here. So ideas for black, most common is knight to e7, bishop to c4, knight to e5, threatening the bishop. This is the main line. Castles is good. b6 is good. Knight to e5 is good, but a few different options for black. I think knight to e5 is probably the best play here. I guess I've also looked at a6 as a potential option here. I think a6 and d6 tend to be playable. On d6, knight to b5 I think can be played, and then on knight to b5, bishop takes f3, f takes f3, and then white needs to do something to take care of this. Queen to h4, king f1. But this tends to be a complicated attack where basically, black has an aggressive attack on the king side, but white has this threat on c7. This is a gambit line I've definitely seen before. This type of thing, is playable for black. So anyways, on this, knight to e5 threatening the bishop. Here, bishop to e2 is most common. Queen to g6, castles, and we're really in basically like mainline Scotch here. This is a very well kind of explored line. Options here for black include d6, castles, and d5. What are the kind of the main themes here? White's going to have this prolonged attack on the king side. White's going to be interested in playing moves like knight to b5 and threatening on c7. Basically, knight to b5 and c7 threats tend to be pretty dangerous. White doesn't really have a great way to respond to an immediate knight to c7. So say in the case of d6, knight to b5 again is a playable move. But the c7 pawn, the c7 pawn stance is pretty weak here. Knight to b5, bishop to h3, and both sides are attacking aggressively. White needs to play bishop f3, castles queenside, and here basically, I guess I would say that this is this generally tends to be good for black. This white attack is not as strong, but yeah, I mean basically this is mainline Scotch. This is stuff that you see frequently if you're an e5 player, yeah, but pawn takes is pretty much necessary, and then white has the options of either playing knight takes, bishop to c4. I've seen c3. This is sort of a Ponziani type situation. But on c3, I guess what you play is d5, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, c takes d4, and black can play bishop to g4. And then basically put heavy threats on d4. In this game, we were thinking of how to play the Scotch game as white. So I guess we'll take it from white's perspective. D4, pawn takes D4, and let's just imagine for the sake of this lesson that you're the type of person who plays knight takes D4. Most common is bishop to C5. Here, bishop to E3. And I just generally like this. I think basically, there are other options here. For example, white can play knight takes C6. White can play knight to B3. But I think bishop to E3 offers white kind of the best sustained positions here. White's showing an eval advantage of about 0.3. Queen to F6, C3, knight to E7, bishop to C4. And with this, white just has, kind of good development. This bishop is on a good diagonal. This bishop is on a good diagonal. The knight gets to play to D2. And assuming that black can basically, if black doesn't make any serious tactical errors, white's going to be able to get pretty good control of the center. Most likely there's going to be an exchange on d4 at some point, and then at that point you can play pawn takes d4, and white will have center control for probably, until at least the late middle game. So knight to e5, bishop to e2. Queen g6 looks playable. I guess I would say there's a number of options, but basically white's up by, white's basically equal. But I think that white overall has a better game here. I just like his position. With queen g6, you can play castles, d6, f3, and overall, I would just say this is comfortable. This is what a very common kind of Scotch game looks like. White has better center control. Black has some attacking chances on the king side, and white has to play sort of tactically resourceful defense to deflect the king side attack. But after moves like bishop to h3. Moves like knight to c6, moves like castles, black is just totally fine. So, it's up to black in terms of what to do, but yeah, this is a fine line for white, no issues. Knight to b5, yeah, I like the knight to b5 lines. These tend to come up, with some frequency. F3, castles, and here, basically knight to c2 I've seen, knight to d2 I've seen, king to h1 I've seen. But basically, black is going to have this kind of attack, and the counter, basically the countering forces here. The play is going to primarily be on the king side. White's going to have better center control, and black's going to have better attacking chances. With accurate defense, white is fine, but the defense really does need to be accurate. This is the type of situation that I think you really need to be a relatively strong tactical player as white. So that's what I would recommend. Really just become a strong tactical player as white if you're going to plan to be a Scotch player. The lines are not memorized. It's not about memorization. And the plans are pretty obvious. It's just basically black attacking on the king side and white defending on the king side. But white needs to really do this correctly. White's going to push on f4, potentially f5. And needs to make sure that none of these things that, basically none of the things that black can do that are dangerous on the king side, manage to be, occur. Overall, I guess I would just say, it's a, it's an even game. It's a very playable game for white. Gambiting that pawn early is not problematic. It's just interesting, basically how high a level you can play this relatively simple game. It's really, I guess, I don't know. I would just say it's interesting. In terms of planning, it's obvious. Like, black's going to attack on the king side. White's going to try to defend on the king side. And things are going to be fine. So yeah, I guess, popular players that play the Scotch Gambit, or the Scotch Opening. Nakamura is one of them that I know. I thought Carlsen had played it too, but it's played at a very high level. Is the point? It's played by attacking players who want to get kind of kingside type attacks. So I'm just gonna pull up a game from like a high level Scotch GM game. This is a game between basically an FM and an IM out of the Scotch. But I think that it'll be helpful because I think it's from the US Chess Pro League, and I think it'll demonstrate kind of main ideas. A lot of kingside play, quick development for both sides, and center control for white. So that's what I was thinking. So yeah, let's take a look now. This is basically an IM versus FM, so relatively high level masters in the Pro Chess League. D4, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop to c5. This is the line that we were looking at. And as opposed to playing bishop to e3, the knight plays to b3 in this line. Threatens this bishop on c5, and this overall I think is going to be fairly interesting. This will show kind of a different line. I'm very accustomed to seeing bishop to e3, but really at high levels, knight to b3 and also c3 are played relatively frequently. Knight to b3 and knight takes c6 are played relatively frequently. 3 moves here. I always see bishop to e3. It's the most common, but the other 2 actually don't trail that much in terms of popularity. So yeah, knight to b3. Okay, this bishop has to move, and bishop goes to b6. I assume that's the only option. So on this knight to b3 line, yeah, bishop to b6 is by far the most common. Here, knight to c3, straightforward development. Black has moves like knight to f6, d6, and black has a slight, basically center disadvantage. This queen has control over the d file. This knight is facing the center. This bishop's on c4 facing against f7. But here, yeah, I guess I would just say that white has a spatial advantage and advantage in the center, and black can try to get quick development, but is still going to lack in terms of overall spatial control. Queen to e2, a5. Instead of a5, I think knight to f6 is probably more popular. Looking at this, I guess it's pretty close to equal. I'm not sure I'm a fan of queen to e2, to be honest. It does look to be the most popular move here. But again, this queen e2 attack with f4, e5 being played, I don't know. I guess I just figure it stunts the bishop's development too much, and overall, I don't know. It's not what I would play, but I also, I would also be playing the bishop to e3 line. So, bishop to e3, a4, knight to d2, a3. That's pretty crazy. I guess I would say this overall that surprises me as a line for black. A3 seems like an overextension. In fact, the engine says that it is. After bishop takes b2, pawn takes b2, rook to either b1 or d1. I wouldn't normally just play. The engine likes d1 because the engine doesn't get scared about the attack of b1 at any point. But I would say I'll play like a human and play rook to b1. Here, c takes b6, and again, the engine plays some pretty inhuman moves. But a human here would definitely play rook takes b2. This is what happened in the game, and I like white's position here. The moves that I would play here for white, knight to d5, focusing in on b6. I think this is probably just better. Knight d5, knight takes b6, and white is comfortable. Knight to f6, queen e3, castles, queen takes b6, and now white's equalized positionally. White's pawn structure is not actually much worse than black's. Black's has one on b7 and one on d6. White has similarly separated pawns. So overall here, I think white has a solid position. This rook is very powerful and mobile on this file. Black's rook is also on an open file, but it doesn't really have much that it can do on it. This persistent threat on b7 provides like a good amount of value for white. Queen e7, bishop e3, queen to e5, knight e2, knight d7. Okay, sure. Overall here, yeah, I think just white's fine. White's going to have to maintain defense on this rook on b2. I don't know if white's going to play knight to c4 here or not. He does. But this is interesting. I mean, overall, this has been kind of a highly tactical, relatively loose game. There hasn't really been much, there hasn't been much into the way of positional play. It's really been pretty tactical from move 7. When black plays a4 followed by a3, you've sort of entered the tactical realm of the game very early. White can play moves like knight to c4, threatening b6. I sort of like knight to c4, to be honest, more than I like queen to e3, but the engine evaluates them as roughly equal. But to me, it makes more sense to play knight to b4. Although the one thing that I would say is good about queen to e3 is that it frees up this bishop to develop normally. So that's a big advantage, that queen e3 move. Queen e3, castles, queen takes, queen e7, bishop to d3. Overall here, I think that this is, this basically just ends up being fine for white. Black has sort of equalized in the center. The thing about the center is that white has a better pawn, but black has better knights. So I don't know. Center control is disputed. Probably slightly better for black, but white has this pawn more advanced than black's pawn is. But of course, black can equalize with equalize and neutralize it with d5. So yeah, overall here interesting. And white's up. But this game was interesting. I think this was somewhat atypical in a Scotch game. Basically, the play involved, a lot of center and queenside play. It still had the characteristic like quick development and white center control, but it didn't involve the kingside attacks from black that are so common in the Scotch. Overall, I guess the theme of the knight on b3 seemed to provide a lot less aggressive strategy, here, but. Let's take a look. Here's a 2200 versus a 2250 in black. Hey, welcome, Lauren. Thanks very much for joining the stream. Yeah, we were just looking over some good Scotch games. Knight f3, knight to c6, knight to c3. This is a delayed Scotch variation. d4 comes on the next move. So 4 knights game Scotch. Sure. Bishop to c5. Basically, this 4 knight Scotch is kind of interesting because it's played with basically 2 things. White's going to have persistent defense on e4 against knight to f6, and White's not going to be able to play c3 as they do in a lot of Scotch lines. So knight takes c6, b takes c6. Looking at the engine eval, White's still better, but White has center control, and I would assume that Black's going to start attacking, but overall here, this 4 knight Scotch with knight takes c6 is again not the purest of Scotch games. Interesting. Yeah, interesting situation, Lauren. H3, knight e5, bishop to f4, queen f6, bishop to g3. And yeah, here I think White's just, I guess I would just say White's better. White can probably play things like bishop to e2, castles. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, what Black has sort of, is going to start his kingside attack, and this tactic is interesting. White, generally has an advanced pawn structure control of the center in the Scotch, but with knight neutralizing on c6, we're seeing less of that and more Black control of the center. Bishop to e2. White's position is still better, probably. This pawn, again, is valuable in terms of center control. This bishop's facing towards d6, sure. And bishop to f3 is also good. So, interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think you're, if you consistently do tactics, Lauren, I think you can probably get, you can really improve. But yeah, I think overall, White ends up in a significantly better position here. White can start doing things like playing f4 and e5 and really, advance these pawns and attack Black aggressively with good king safety. Again, it's just sort of interesting to see where the play is in these various openings. This queen's attack on the king side is fairly superficial, so White can start attacking on the king side as well. Queen d2, queen d4. But I'm thinking like moves like f4, f5 will be really solid for White here. Pawn takes, bishop d3. This all looks good. Bishop to e4 is given as a mistake. Let's see if we can figure out why. Pawn takes d6. I guess the c5 pawn is hanging. But at the same point, this c5 hanging doesn't really matter, because if pawn takes c5, Black's just going to have tripled isolated pawns, lose probably 1 or 2 of them. So bishop to e4, I guess, they're evaluating c takes d6 as best. I'm sort of curious about other moves that aren't c takes d6, but yeah, I think this is overrating c takes d6, to be completely honest. C takes d6, when you look at it at this eval, only has a plus 1.3, but when you look at it on this eval, it gets a plus 2.4. So I don't know. I don't think that the d5 pawn is that important for White to worry about, because if taken, yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking about this. Basically, like bishop to e4, bishop to e4 is, I think it comes. It's basically given as a mistake, against this bishop to e4, against this c takes d6. I think c takes d6 is getting evaluated as too good. If you look at c takes d6 from this perspective, the eval is plus 1.37, but if you look at this perspective, it's plus 2.4. I think it's not so much that bishop to e4 is a mistake, but that the computer's overrating c takes d6 after you play bishop to e4 for some reason. These algorithm things are interesting to me, at least. Bishop takes, rook takes. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I think white's fine here. This is, like, fine. Rook takes f2, rook e7, king h8. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, overall here, this looks about equal. No real issues. I don't know. This is going to be a draw. But overall, an interesting game. A game where white, I thought, could have attacked more aggressively on the king side. Let's take a... yeah, I think so. I think this should be about a draw. I mean, let's see if, let's see how it turns out. Let's go back. Yeah, no, white was better, for sure. White is up by, 1.3 pawns here. But at the same time, converting this, knight takes c5, pawn takes c5. When white had 2 rooks on the 7th, we can take a look. Not so, to be completely honest, I'm... unless I'm missing something. I mean, 2 rooks on the 7th is very good, I agree. But I think there might be tactical, I think that it's hard to, basically win with equal material here. I'm a little confused about how white managed to get a pawn down. How did that happen? But... yeah, b6 was greedy for white. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the 2 rooks, yeah. No, I mean, the 2 rooks on the 7th are good for white, for sure. Yeah, no. I mean, well, white had a big advantage earlier. And then here, I think b6 was an error for white. I think instead, either g3 or king to h3, and white's fine. But yeah, b6 and things are, I guess I would just say, b6 seems incorrect for white here, in my opinion. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, white has way more active rooks. Yep, I hear you. I understand. I think it's definitely true that white has better rooks here. But at the same time, it feels like there just aren't enough pawns left for white to convert. But yeah, totally. These 2 rooks versus white's 2 rooks. White's 2 rooks are just much better organized, and they're placed exactly where white would generally want them to be. So, yeah, I guess the thing that's sort of more surprising to me is drawing from an eval of plus 1.4 or something here. When white's in this situation, I figured that white, is solid. So yeah, this pawn on f5, bishop to c4 can be played, but yeah, this overall, I don't know. I guess I would just say, yeah, this didn't really convert. Anyways, white's fine. That sort of transferred into a, I mean, that basically ended up fine, and yeah, no, I guess I'm sort of thinking a little bit. I think the best that white ever got in this game was around bishop to e4. To be honest, it seemed to really prefer pawn takes d6, but I bet if we actually play it, it's gonna that 2.4 is gonna deteriorate pretty quickly. So c takes d4. C takes d6, c takes d6, and I'm not convinced this is much better than that immediate bishop to e4 line. It looks like it's about 1.5. The other one was at 1.4 or something. So I don't know. Interesting. So it's 1.53 here if you take the pawn on d6. Here they're calling it 0.55. All right. Yeah, exactly, right. And the triple pawns don't really help at all. Knight takes, pawn takes. I mean, honestly, this is kind of I don't like black's position that much here. The engine, I guess, in terms of improving this game, the engine would say play f3 and don't trade your bishop for this knight. I guess that makes sense. That seems fair. But bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and now the rooks are on the 7th, so. Whatever. Anyways, interesting situation. I felt like black should have, or white should have held on to the h4 pawn. Wouldn't have mattered probably, but yeah, let's take a look. Good question, Lauren. Let's see. Potentially, right? I mean, it sort of helped black to play bishop takes f4 here. Basically, I mean, I don't know what the better option was because bishop takes f4 and you get the pawn on c6 at least. But yeah, yeah, no, I think that's true. The engine is big on holding on to this bishop pair. Also, playing f3 keeps black out, right? So I think f3 is really the advantage. So f3, I think, defending e4, that is a better way, I think, for white to play it, and it avoids that problem with the computer. Basically, yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're right about that. Lauren. I think that's definitely a big piece of why f3 is so favored. But bishop takes f4 too is probably it's trading off your bishop pair voluntarily, so I think that might be an error. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, super helpful for you to draw. Basically take basically ask for points. Where I can clarify. Super helpful in terms of steering this analysis. Yeah, I think that's right. But yeah, f3 over bishop takes f4. That's right. And yeah, white's better. I don't know. I mean, basically, white is better here, but doesn't have the ability to convert. I mean, potentially. Again, not super obvious. But yeah, knight takes. How obvious is it that those black pawns are going to get lost? This is a terrible pawn structure for black. That's for sure. So f3, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. White definitely has the edge. But f3, basically, f3, bishop takes e4, or rook takes e4, and then rook to c4 looks fine. So yeah, overall, I think it makes sense to not trade off this bishop for the reason of I don't think that white should be doing anything that will undouble these pawns. No, not at all. No, it's really interesting. I think f3 is better. So f3 and then bishop takes f4 and then bishop takes e5 and white's just better. So interesting situation, to be honest. So I don't know. Bishop takes f4. Maybe bishop takes f4 is the thing to do now. Let's see what happens if black plays like a neutral move here, like h6. Then does bishop takes f4 kind of enter the list in terms of things to do? Like here, bishop takes f4. I don't know. Still not considered to be the best for white. Interesting situation, to be honest. Lauren. It's yeah. I mean, it does feel like white is winning here, but again, I think by the time it gets to that rook endgame, even though white's rooks are better, I don't think this is anything that white can convert into a win. Doubled rooks on the 7th, though, feels like a good situation, but I don't think there's enough material. Anyways, very interesting game. Let's take a look at the next one. Yeah, 4 games. We have 4 games tonight instead of the normal 3. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think basically, if you can shut down your opponent, that's good. We were looking at some interesting rook and pawn tactics, the last rook and pawn endgame lesson that we did. White was using basically active threats to place black into a defensive position. I thought that was kind of a cool way. It sounds like kind of obvious, but like when in the endgame study that we were looking at, we were basically looking at basically white's rook had forced positions from both the king and rook of the opposing side, and then the king could get in and start attacking because the king and rook were immobilized in that situation. So shutting down counterplay is good. And what's interesting is that sometimes you can shut down counterplay with these kinds of aggressive attacks. If you play moves that your opponent can't avoid defending, if they need to make defensive moves to defend them, that often shuts down their counterplay. So yeah, interesting. Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's right. Again, I wouldn't want to be, dishonest. Like I end up in a situation where I miss I miss a good amount of things. There are times when I don't understand why the engine is doing what it's doing, or why it's, particularly in heavily positional lines. I find myself missing more, more engine moves and having an incomplete understanding of why the engine is, opting for particular lines. Usually, with enough study, I can figure it out, but sometimes it takes a while. The engine just presents some very complicated things. Anyways, I wanted to look at this one: d4, d5, bishop to f4. This is Scotch. This is from Suban Budo, and in this, this is London. Still thinking of the Scotch lesson from earlier. So yeah, bishop to f4. And then options for black, h6 isn't even on the list, to be honest. If we look at this, this is this move is not terrible, but a bit iffy. Maybe g5 is coming next, but h6 is not the most dynamic response to London. I haven't seen it tried before, to be honest, and it's not in the opening book. I don't think it's terrible, but I think that it's unusual. h6, g5. All right. Knight to f3, knight to f6, e3, b6, and here I think white's just up. White's up like 0.6. Things look fine. Obviously, there's no engine lines no book lines we can draw on because of this weird h6 move. But overall, I think white's got a good position. The bishop is strong. There's no direct attack. Black's queenside light squares are looking a little bit weak, to be honest. So I'm thinking like things like bishop to b5 might be playable for white. C4, knight c3, bishop to b5. White should be good here. Knight bd2, knight c6. But here I think I'm surprised they say knight to e5. That's kind of interesting. My eye gets immediately drawn to bishop to b5, trying to exploit the weak diagonal. But then engine says knight to e5, knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, and white is up significantly here. Interesting. Knight to g8. Interesting. Yeah. No, I think it was not an efficient play. Yeah, that is you're completely. I mean, if that's the explanation, I think that's not particularly good idea. But yeah, that seems as plausible as anything else. I actually thought when I saw h6, I thought it was going to go along with g5 and g4 and h5 and h4. I thought this was going to be like I thought that's where black was going with that. But yeah, your explanation preventing the pin on the knight does make sense. Anyways, c3 defends this pawn. a6, a4, bishop b7, b4, and white's just good, I think. I think white's got a huge space advantage on the queen side. I don't know if I'd play bishop to e2 or bishop to b3 or bishop to d3 and then castle. Definitely advancing this threat on the king's or on the queen side for white looks like a good idea. Things like b5, bishop to b5, knight to e5. That feels like something that would be helpful for white here, but again, I don't know. Bishop d3, bishop d6, bishop g3. But yeah, black's never really done anything to challenge white here. And this is a huge blunder. So yeah, to this point, I guess what I would say is that it's been kind of an unexciting, unchallenging game for white. White's sort of developed healthily, has started moving on the queen side. But yeah, nothing has really happened. But then black makes this pretty catastrophic error. So just pawn takes e5, and now white's up by like 4, and then something really crazy happens. So rook takes b6 is a very unusual move here. I don't have much of an explanation why that would be played, to be honest. So it looks just like a hung piece for white. White should just recapture. But okay, the winning move was knight takes f1. With knight takes f1, white is 1. But yeah, that was weird. This was also a little bit weird. Rook takes d6 is much better than rook to b4. And now we're just in some kind of crazy tactical situation. Basically black gives up a mate in 3. I don't want to follow this any further because I think this is we've kind of distanced it from the opening and thematic contents here. But yeah, Lauren is making this great line, basically h6 defending the g5 square so that the bishop can't pin on g5 into d8. And then e6 is what pairs with h6. So that makes complete sense to me. I think that's a good explanation of at least at least what's going on in the position. I don't know what the intent was on h6, but that's as good an explanation as any. Okay. So basically, I think white's played fine. Then white forks the bishop and knight, winning a piece. And white should be in a pretty good position here. Then white plays a move that doesn't recapture a hanging piece. So that one is confusing. It should be, but it isn't. So rook takes b6 instead of knight takes f1. So I don't know. It just enters a tactically complicated position. I think Subban, spending a good amount of time on tactics is somewhere where I think it might be really helpful. I think that really might be helpful for you. I think if you spend a lot of time on tactics, an hour or two a day for a month or two, that will be very helpful for you. I think Subban. So there's just enough oversights in this game. Like missing something taking f1 is a big error. So knight takes f1 I think is a better way to play this. So yeah, interesting game. And yeah, white ends up by about up a piece and winning. So yeah, interesting game, Subban. Thank you for sending it. It was interesting to take a look at that London line. That London line was unusual in my opinion. Surprising to me that basically surprising that you were able to get such a good good play there. Or the black was able to get such good play out of h6. White was just never challenged, and then the game was over. The game would be over after pawn takes pawn to d5, or sorry e5. Yeah, I mean, I also think at that level, I think it's very important to just study a lot tactically. It's just hard to win games if you're hanging pieces. So I think that the point is to not hang pieces if you can. So this is the French. Bishop to d3 is an unusual move in the French. In terms of frequency, bishop to d3 is like well down this list. There's 150,000 games. This is played in 1400. So technically, this might actually fail our eval test. The test that we use for opening lines is basically if it's played less than 1% of the time. This is played just under 1% of the time, and if it leads to a shift of more than half of a pawn against you, versus the best line there. So bishop to d3 is considered to be a book move, but the eval there is minus 0.4. The eval on knight to c3 is like plus 0.4. So it's a difference of 0.8, and it's played less than 1% of the time. I think this is getting pretty close to a move that you can screen out based on our opening criteria. Bishop to d3, I don't think. Yeah, no. So I don't know. But anyways, yeah, that's the criteria I've been using. I'm yet to find a situation where I didn't think it was correct. There's maybe some English lines or something that are close, but I'm yet to find something that I didn't really think was right there. So yeah, bishop to d3, d takes e4, b takes e4, knight to f6, bishop to f3, and basically white is I think white's just fine here. Black can play moves like c5, black can play moves like bishop to e7, but white's looking fine. White's facing off his f3 against a8. Can play things like knight to e2, can play things like c4, can play things like knight to c3. But overall, I think white is just good, so I don't know. Bishop to e7, knight c3, castles, bishop e3, all is well. I guess what I would say is move like knight to e2 could be good. Scandinavian. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess in some sense. Yeah, or well, this is on the bishop takes line. But yeah, you're right. It's missing the same pawns. So yeah, technically this is kind of a Scandinavian type position, where yeah, I see it. I mean, the bishop is placed differently, but yeah, the pawn structure is the same. Yep. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's look at what happened in the game. C5. With this C5, yeah, I mean, interesting. C5 is the second most common move. D takes is the first most common. C5 is interesting. I mean, I think that black can do things to undermine the center here. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, there's truth. So yeah, c3 I think is better for white here. If white plays c3, then he might be able to maintain his French pawn structure, or he might end up with an isolated queen's pawn. Both are possible. E takes, pawn takes, and here ultimately black is the one who's left with the isolated queen's pawn. Wasn't sure who it was going to be. But yeah, isolated queen's pawn, you have this bishop to c5 facing off against f2. You have quick development for black, knight f6, knight c6, bishop to g4, knight to f3. But yeah, white's just fine. I think there's no real issues here. Castles. I guess I would say bishop to g5 probably. But yeah, this pawn is sort of hanging. Yep. Yeah, I mean, with none of white's pawns having moved, there's going to be some vulnerability on, this threats on d5. b3, knight to c6, bishop b2, bishop to g4. All of this seems kind of, all of this seems fine. Yeah, I guess I would say, you mean b3. Yeah. Yep, bishop to b4 is the natural square for the bishop. Or bishop to g5, I guess, right, too. Yeah. Yeah. b3, bishop to b2, that looks interesting. We'll see how that goes. But bishop to g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3. White's facing off against this knight here. Knight to e4, knight bd2, knight takes, h takes. Just a very comfortable position overall. Black is like, this play is sort of, I guess I would say it's a little bit, not too interesting, but or a little bland. I guess white could start a kingside attack maybe, but overall here it just feels like there's not too much. Okay, b3, knight c6, bishop to b2. This is, yeah, no, it is weird. I mean, white's not doing anything to successfully undermine d5. A successful plan to undermine d5 would probably be like bishop to g5, knight to c3. Yeah, I hear. No, I understand. I mean, it weakens opportunities to attack d5. I agree. I basically agree with you, Lauren. I think that that's generally right. Bishop to g5, knight to c3, facing off against d5. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know about. I mean, I don't know. Part of me is sort of tempted to go with a plan that involves moving the knight to c3. So, like, let's say here, like bishop to g5, then knight to c6, then knight to c3. I would think this would be kind of a plan that would be reasonable. And then if d4, then knight to e4 maybe. But I don't know. Yeah, d4, knight e4. But this is a pretty interesting situation. But yeah, b3, you're right. I mean, b3 is not the way to play that isolated queen's pawn, that's for sure. Yep. Yeah, this is just awkward. And basically there's not going to be any opportunity to attack the d5 pawn ever. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, so you're thinking of a knight, basically knight d2, knight b3, and then maybe the f knight to d4. Yeah, makes sense. Yep. Yeah, no, I like that plan. Makes sense to me. So yeah, c4, d4, a3, a5. I think basically here white can just sort of play with this and yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that's actually a really good point that Lauren is bringing up. So basically, what Lauren is proposing is, playing a, basically playing an opening that, that trades off, or playing a middle game that trades off all the pieces, and then having the isolated queen's pawn be a particularly big liability in like a rook and pawn endgame. That makes a lot of sense. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure I would have thought of it that coherently, but like that is a really good kind of end game plan. Um, yeah, yep. Basically isolate the pawn, trade off all the pieces, and then basically win in the end game. Yeah, I get it. It also it really delays the that bishop getting involved in this game as well. Yep, I agree. So yeah, white's up about a pawn going into the endgame, and I guess they agree to draw. They must have, yeah. So the two players agree to draw here. That's a little bit anticlimactic, but anyways, TK sent this game in, so let's take a look. TK's game. Where can we find improvements? TK sends good games. I like the games that TK actually, the ones that TK plays, because TK is about an expert, and plays a very like kind of plays a very kind of coherent idea, and doesn't make too many tactical errors. So we can actually really think about his positions from kind of a positional perspective. But Lauren comes up with a good idea. Basically playing bishop to g5 or bishop to f4 is a much more natural placement of that bishop. The idea of trading off everything and then basically attacking this isolated queen's pawn, that makes sense. That is a thought that makes sense to me. So I like that idea. Um, yeah. But still, though, I mean, I guess I would say that, unless you're actually really going for like a kingside attack, I don't even know how bishop to b2 is super beneficial. Like, I think just playing bishop to g5, at least bishop to g5 you develop with a general threat. So I'm sort of like, I guess, yeah. So we're basically talking about. I think b3 is something that we would want to change about this game, right? So b3, bishop to b2, okay. B3 as opposed to b3, bishop to g5, playing basically pinning the knight to the queen. That seems like a good idea. I think that's a good idea for white. Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, you could maybe c3. But yeah, no, Lauren is proposing the idea knight to d2, knight to b3, and then knight to d4. Makes sense. Um, yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I sort of wonder if white was looking at bishop b2 to bishop to d4, maybe. Although that's sort of inefficient. Like, I have to think that there's a better way to do that. Anyways, bishop takes bishop to g5. I think is better for white. And now I guess I would say it's about equal. So yeah, I mean this bishop. Look how this bishop really ended up very misplaced on this on b2. So it is true. Knight to d2, c4, d4, and yeah, this bishop just had kind of no opportunities. So, nah. Rook takes, h3. But yeah, no, I agree. I think there wasn't really that much opportunity for white to improve on this game other than that. In terms of except the opening move, bishop to d3. So I think this is probably the first one, TK. I think you can just remove this unless you really have a good reason why you like playing this unusual move. Bishop to d3 is a move that basically fails our opening test. It kind of leads to a situation in which white is basically white's planning on recapturing e4 with the bishop, but ends up in a situation where it basically is not, it's more than half a pawn worse, and it's played less than 1% of the time. So that is a poor explanation of why you should remove it. It is our criteria for why you should move it, but it is not a good reason for why you should remove it. I think the main issue is that it basically neutralizes white's pawn structure. It gives the opportunity for d takes e4, which is the best play for black. D takes e4, bishop takes e4, and this is no longer even a French pawn structure. This is something we were talking about, how it was sort of like the Scandinavian. This d4 faces off well against e6, but it becomes a target of attack, and also this bishop, there's going to have to be moves spent fixing kind of this bishop's positioning. Maybe bishop to f3, maybe bishop to d3, but definitely tempo is going to have to be expended in fixing this. Right, yeah. So c6, c6 is pretty, c6 pretty much stops this bishop on that diagonal. So yeah, I mean, the eval is still good for white, the eval is good for black after d takes e4. So yeah, it can get shut down pretty easily by c6 as well. Pawn takes, bishop takes, knight f3. And yeah, white is good, I think. Castles. But yeah, so the first move, take out bishop to d3. Second move, b3 is not really the plan for the bishop. Bishop to g5 is a much more diagonal for this bishop. Bishop to f4 is also good, sort of London-like. And basically the knight can go to c3, or the knight can go to d2, b3, d4, and you can wait to trade off the knight or trade off all the pieces and win the isolated queen's pawn in the endgame. That was the plan that Lauren was proposing, and I think it's probably right. My idea, a knight to c3 paired with bishop to g5, probably a worse plan, to be completely honest. So yeah, those are two potential plans for white, yeah. Yep, that makes sense. Lauren is just saying bishop g5, knight d2, knight b3, knight d4, c3. Yep, sounds good. But yeah, b3 doesn't allow you to do that, and now your knight has much more limited mobility. And so basically, bishop b3 stops both of the plans that we were considering. It stops the plan where you bring your knight over to d4 through b3, and it stops the plan where you move your bishop to g5. So, anyways, b3 I think is a positional error, and after that, black is a little bit better, and then you guys agree to draw, very early. So yeah, interesting position, interesting. Thank you very much for sending the game, TK. And yeah, let's keep looking. Let's keep going. Yeah, thank you for sending it. It was a very good, instructive game. Thanks, TK. All right, here's X Paradox's game. He was asking me about this one, but X Paradox is looking at is playing black here. He's facing the two knights as white. Bishop to c5. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here, and thanks for participating. It's always more interesting when people are interested in the positions. Yeah, thanks for being here. So basically, this two knights is white. Yeah, Jen's the best. Yes. But here, yeah, here's Jen. But yeah, here, knight to c3, bishop to f5, or bishop to c5, bishop to c4, e6. This is all just good. I guess I would say that d4 is really premature for white. D4, pawn takes d4, and black is better. Better for black, I think. Knight takes d4 probably. Knight takes d4 simplifies, but I actually think this is kind of an interesting. Thank you very much, Lauren. Thanks for being here, and thank you for participating. So yeah, this threat on d4, pawn takes d4 is good, knight takes d4 is good, but black should basically figure out kind of how to play against this. So yeah, up to black to figure out what to do. But I don't know. Either way seems to win the pawn. So I would say pawn takes d4, probably best. Knight takes, bishop takes, and black is good. White can play queen to f3. I don't know. E takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes f6. This is the game continuation, and that is clearly not correct. So black is up by about 4 pawns here. And then the position equalizes with bishop takes c5. So we have two very offsetting, we have two offsetting errors. This opening was fine. d4 is not the play for white. After d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes. Black is better. But black promptly loses back the, yeah, Jen is the best. What can I say? Jen's the best. But yeah, so basically here a4, a6, and black is again fine. The issue happens when black plays bishop takes c5, and there only becomes one pawn on this double attacked knight. Bishop takes, queen takes, and white's better. So I guess that's the thing. I guess I would say pawn takes c5 is better than bishop takes c5, and with d takes c5, black is fine. Bishop takes, and the piece gets given back. Now we actually have an interesting position again. This is a situation in which we have basically two offsetting piece losses. White has a huge center. Black has a vulnerability on d6. Those together probably make it a better a better game for white. Black could probably play knight f6. Black could probably play queen f6. But I think black's just good here. So knight to f6, knight to d5, knight takes, bishop takes. White's better. Probably things like castles are good. Maybe bishop to e6. But I like the position overall. Bishop e6 runs into a tactical issue. This hangs bishop b7. That was not good. But eh. And now we're back to equality. So I guess my main point, X Paradox, is that this game is way too volatile. You really need to, I don't know the time control on this, but I strongly recommend making sure that, you do your tactical study, you really put the time in there, and you have an opportunity to capitalize. So that's my recommendation. That's my recommendation for you, X Paradox. I think that will be a good thing to do. So yeah, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook c8. Now you're back to equality, but this is just kind of crazy. This is just way too much tactical volatility. Tactical study is the way to do this. Really make sure that you do enough tactical study. I guess I would say, the best ways to do this are things like, Puzzle Rush, Puzzle Battle. I'm always talking about them. I think that'll really help the most. Here, a6, bishop e3, c5, and pawn takes. But bishop takes loses back the piece that white hung. So, pawn takes c5, and you have two defenders. Bishop takes c5, and you have one. So this, this unfortunately got to be too much. So white is now winning, and then the advantage gets lost again with bishop to e6, or sorry with f4. With f4, bishop trades, the bad bishop on e6 trades off for the great bishop on d5, and now you're just in an equal-ish endgame. The d pawns are relatively equally matched. There's not really much there, and things look good for. I guess things look kind of good for black. Yeah, so black wins. But I guess what I would say, X Paradox, is there's just too much tactical volatility here. This opening was fine. d6, here you're playing just fine as black, no errors. But the real error here was on d4. d4 is not correct there. Better moves, pawn takes d4. d4, he loses the pawn. So that's the first tactical error. Then knight takes, bishop to b6, and all of this I think is, I think all of this is basically, white has the advantage. but the overall volatility is too much. I mean, these accuracies are low, and these swings in terms of evaluation are large. So I think that's your point. I think that's the point that X Paradox is just. I would recommend not doing this. Look for opportunities to look for opportunities to improve your tactics. I am very happy to look over your games, but at the end of the day, if pieces are getting lost to one move tactics, or if on this particular case bishop to e6 is getting played, hanging b7, I mean that's not really something that I can help too much with, unfortunately. I'd like to, but it's really tactical study that you need to do on your own to successfully defend these types of things. So. Interesting situation, and ultimately, I think it's sort of it was I guess I would just say it was interesting. It was a game with a lot of volatility, a lot of tactical chances, and black finishes on top. But the main characteristic of this is tactical study. It's needed. It's needed to move to the next chess. The rest is all just kind of a low priority things. If you're learning openings but hanging pieces, that's not particularly helpful. Sorry, the hiccups. Anyways, this was interesting. Interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, X Paradox. And on to the last one of tonight. Maybe if we don't get enough, if we finish early enough, we can take a look at another high-level GM game with the Scotch. E4, C5, C3. Okay, so Sicilian Alpin. This game, by the way, is sent to us by George, and on C3, E6, D4. Basically, White's looking fine. I think this basically, there's no issue here. White can play knight to F3. The bishop can play to C4. The bishop can play to E2. It's a Sicilian Alpin position. I don't know how common so I want to study kind of the relative frequencies of this move. So first, knight to C3 relative to other moves. No, I'm good. I'm just, I'm fine. It's the thing that's kind of annoying is that I have to turn the air conditioner off because it makes too much background noise for the stream. So I always look a little bit. But no, I'm not tired at all. I'm totally fine. But it is warm in here because I have to turn the AC off because otherwise it makes too much noise. So if I look hot, potentially it's that. So C3 is a move where basically you basically play like a 6.5% move. C3, E6. Yes, thanks, Jen. Jen is
Is it working?
Yeah, Jen is playing around in the background. But Jen has a little fan thing.
You said it was hot. I'm
Yeah.
trying to help.
It is hot. It's really hot.
But I
in
am
here.
louder than the air conditioner.
Yeah.
Want me to just turn it on?
No, it's all good. No, because it's really annoying. Well, no, it's not your fault. It's just the air conditioner is super loud. So, anyways,
Always do love.
okay, love you. All right. So C3 is basically a one, or I would say 2/3 of, or whatever, 6.5% move. C3, E6, D4, A6, and White has the opportunities for knight to F3. Basically knight to F3. B5 is good for White. B5, bishop to D3, bishop to B7, castles, knight to F6. And overall here, I think White looks comfortable. This never really went anywhere in terms of attacks. Pawn takes D4, pawn takes D4, rook to E1. White is just fine. Is my thinking here. B5. That's I think an error. D4, A6. I'm also curious about so D4 in terms of popularity here. D4 is the second most popular, still a very popular move, 25% move. But A6 is way down the list. If we're looking at this, D5 is what's played here. I thought this was interesting too. I wonder if there's a good opportunity for White to fracture with D5, but D5 is basically the main move for Black here. With D5, you're in sort of an interesting position, sort of French-like, to be honest. This basically transposes into the French in like the main line. But overall here, I think this is good. A6, knight to F3. And then black has the opportunity to play either d5 or b5. Black plays b5 here. Again, this is just overall weak. The better plays for black were d5 at multiple points. Black playing on this king side was just not a particularly strong plan, and basically getting space advantage on the queen side. Getting spatial advantage on the queen side while white gets center play is not particularly a particularly good plan for black. So yeah, white's looking comfortable. Good ideas. I mean, basically, white should kind of continue to get natural development here. E5, C4, castles, ace h6, rook e1. All this is good. Basically, white's got an advantage of about 1.4, and white is good, I guess I would say. This knight to e4, rook takes, knight to c6. White's up by about 3 pawns. This is a good position for white. But d6 is an error that basically is a really big positional error. d5 is better. d5, and then you have really kind of pretty dangerous stuff. So let's look at d5 line. d5, the best opportunity for black is knight to a5. Then you play d6. This is brutal. Yeah, no, of course. Thanks, Jess, or thanks, GM Shadow. Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to do this. Chess lessons should be free. Chess lessons should be free and available to everyone. Yeah, that's the goal. So I'm working on it. Nothing will make me happier than when international masters give lessons for free on stream. I don't think it's too far off, but that's why I'm doing it. So yeah, rook takes e2, and basically white's up by about 0.25. Knight to d6, bishop takes, pawn takes, castles, bishop to f4. Yeah, and please tell your friends, if you appreciate it, definitely, the goal is to really make this channel popular. I think basically forcing a situation in which, people have to move to a free business model is really a good thing for the world as a whole. So yeah, if you guys want to help the stream, please tell your friends, please promote if you can. And that's the goal. That's what we're interested in. Yeah, this I think is good for white. Queen to f6, g3, queen g6, knight to h4, and yeah, I think overall this should be good. Maybe bishop to e5 is better. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Alexandre. It's any effort helps, and again, this is all just for fun, but I think if this channel got popular, we would have the ability to really make chess lessons free. There's a lot of money being spent by people, and there's a lot of money being spent by governments supporting chess lessons that could easily be free, and that to me seems wrong. So I don't know. That's what we're going for. Let's make chess lessons free and available to everyone. So anyways, G3 is another. So in terms of plays for white, this play for white I think is good. Rook takes, knight to c6, knight to d6, and pawn takes, castles. Yeah, but to be fair, you're still here. You're still here, Jen. You are a viewer. You probably wouldn't have been someone who would have paid for chess lessons. But in any case, your support of the stream, Jen, is very very impressive. So yeah, knight to h5, queen to f6, bishop to e5, pawn takes, queen to g7. White is comfortable, but the errors here. So the first error is in playing knight to d6. Knight to d6 simplifies too easily. You're starting to get good attacking chances with d5, pawn takes d5, knight to d6. You're checking the king. On bishop takes, you play pawn takes, and then get this open file against this king. Knight to d6 simplifies. Bishop takes d6, pawn takes d6, and white is barely better. So yeah, this was an error. You could have gotten a lot more out of this. I think you could have played, d5, in which case knight to a5, or you could have played, you could even play something that's less passive. But basically, just trading this knight, which is excellently placed, and in this big center, for this bishop on f8, which is ultimately what this trade is, right? Like, you're trading the knight on e4 for the bishop on f8. So it's not particularly good. That trade is it's not very strong. So yeah, moving the basically the knight on e5 or knight on e4 is way stronger than the bishop on f8. So you wouldn't want to spend a move just requiring that trade to happen. It's not a trade that you want to happen in the first place, so you don't want to act proactively to make it happen. Better is instead, pretty much, basically many moves. Bishop to f4 looks straightforward and good. D5, it looks tactical and best. And b3 also undermines, is also on the kind of list, and it can basically undermine the pawn on c4. So overall, knight to d6, pawn to d6, castles, bishop to f4, and this is basically equals. g3 is an error. G3 runs into g5. The best move here for black is g5. On g5, there's real problems that are going to start to happen for white. I sort of like bishop to d. Wait. This is really a problem. Okay, this is a bigger problem than I thought it was. On g5, you're basically threatening the bishop. So g3 and then g5. You're threatening this bishop, which is pinned to this hanging knight. So g5 just straightforwardly wins a piece for black. I didn't notice that immediately, but yeah, g3, g5, and black is winning. So this is the second error for white. Basically, white can't play. Basically can't play g3. It both eliminates defense for the knight on f3 and it limits mobility for the bishop on f4. But this open line on these two pieces is pretty killer for black. So after anything really, the queen can take f3. So black misses this, plays queen to g6 instead, and then knight takes h4 is another error. And then basically queen takes h2, rook takes h2, g5 wins for black again. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so just for everybody, who's interested, and everybody who is interested, we're basically doing a simul after the or basically midway through the stream tomorrow. So at 8:45 a.m. We are doing a simul. 16 people played in the last one. I hope this one breaks that record. I'm hoping for, I don't know, 25 or 30. But I'm playing 30 minutes with 30-second delay. And I'm really hoping that there will be a lot of people there. But however many people there are, it'll be for fun, and it'll be cool. Everyone will get an opportunity to play a master, and I'll try my best to play well. But yeah, it was 12-4 in the last one, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks, Alexandre. Really appreciate it. So tomorrow morning during the morning stream, we're doing a big simul, and that should be a lot of fun. Okay, so queen f6, rook to e1, g5 forks the bishop and knight. This has been there for a bit. It sort of turns into tactical play. I really appreciate you sending the game, George. I think basically this sort of what happened is it turned into tactical play as it can. This situation, basically e4, c5. This Alapin was good. Black played offbeat lines here. Way better for black was moves like d5, challenging the Alapin center immediately. But basically white ends up with a good solid center position, a really strong kind of pawn set here, and things are good. Knight to e4, rook takes, and pawn takes d6, castles, bishop to f4. But overall, this position is just comfortable, good for white. G3 was the real error. G3, and then black can play g5 and win a piece. So two errors here. First, knight to d6 traded off the knight, which is good, for the bishop, which is bad. You shouldn't have spent a move trading a good, well-posted piece for a bad, not well-posted piece. This bishop was not a good piece at all. This bishop was going to, basically only had e7 because of all the black squared pawns. But this knight had full posting and the ability to move to a bunch of good squares. So that was not a good trade, is my point. So that was the thing. That was the first move that I think white can improve on there. The second move that white can improve on, this g3 limiting the mobility of this bishop. On g5, black can straightforwardly win a piece, either the bishop if the bishop doesn't move, or the knight if the bishop does move. And then there are a few more tactics here that were pretty important. B4 is an error. B4 runs into bishop takes g2, and then on bishop takes g2, king takes g2, queen f7, and it's going to be difficult to defend this to defend this king side. This is not as glaring as the first two, but I think this is another kind of positional error. Basically allowing this strong attack to show up on the king side. Anyways, really interesting game. The two moves that I would be the most focused on correcting, to be honest. I think this opening went well for you. There wasn't much in terms of opening theory expansion here, just because it was, it was basically opening theory that involved, it was opening theory that involved, like black is supposed to challenge in the center. Instead, black challenged on the queen side, and it wasn't particularly good. So yeah, the moves that I would change. Hold on to the knight. The knight is well posted in a good space. Don't trade it. There's no reason to trade it. Knight to c6 even makes the error bigger. Knight to c6, and this bishop can't even trade for this knight. This knight is just posted, looking at d6, f6, c5, all as potential good squares to go to. So trading that off, I think, was an error. The ideas that the engine comes up with were d5, b3, and bishop to f4, all of which I think are good for different reasons. Okay, so that's the improvement number one, and then improvement number two was on g3. You basically eliminate the defense on this knight and lead to the tactical g5. So g5 can be played here, and then the bishop's pinned, and then the knight and bishop are both getting attacked. So yeah, those are the two moves that I would focus on. Overall here, I think this is a good situation. I think this all sort of makes sense. And yeah, I guess I would say I like white's I like black's position after this. But the opening played out well for you. I think you had some good chances. Leaving the opening, you were completely fine. Yeah, unfortunately, there were those two issues, which I think were positional ones. It wasn't really a tactical problem. Knight to d6 is not a tactical problem. It's a positional problem relating to the evaluation of this knight on e4, its relative strength against the piece that it's going to get traded for, this bishop on f8. So yeah, those two combinations there, or the combination of the strengths of those two pieces, that is a thing to think about. So yeah, so knight to d6, that was better, or that was better off avoided. D5 puts immediate pressure on black. B3 undermines the c4 pawn, and then bishop to f4, develops a piece. So good stuff. And yeah, now with g3, this queen attacks f4 and f3. So good playing, makes sense, and yeah, not too much. I guess I would say not too much there. Anyways, interesting situation, interesting game, and those are the two key places of improvement for white, I think. That limiting mobility limiting g3, that was not strong, and then the trade of the good knight for the not so good bishop. Both of those were errors, and both of those were things that I think white could have improved on in this game. All right, I think I'm going to wrap up a few minutes early tonight. I'm not sure, but I think I might play the USCF Blitz. I might not 100%. But the main thing to think about is we have a simul going on tomorrow at 8:45 a.m. Eastern. That's in about 10 hours. Yeah, the next session starts at 8 a.m. Eastern. We'll probably spend the first half of that session trying to get players for the simul. But yeah, 16 people were at the last one. The time control will be 30 minutes and 30 seconds, and I think that'll be really fun. So yeah, simul tomorrow at 8:45 a.m. Eastern. We have that to look forward to, and that's what we're gonna do. So thanks all. Thank you all very much for joining the stream. Thanks all very much for sending in your games and for participating in the analysis. Always really helpful to have people interested in participating. And yeah, please, I'm very appreciated that you guys stay interested in it, and please join the simul tomorrow if that's something that interests you. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to wrap up for tonight. Everybody have a good night, and yeah, thank you very much, Alexandre. Look forward to seeing you there, and yeah, I'm hoping it'll be a good turnout. Awesome. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.